I've worked on NHS contracts, or Tesco, Sainsbury's, people like that doing PCI compliance. So I have a few war stories and a few scars, but I won't show you those.
Simon Brownhill is a cybersecurity expert. After 9 years as a weapons engineer in the Navy, Simon is now spearheading the delivery of cybersecurity solutions for major organizations. In this episode, he will tell us his story and give us an insight into leadership in cybersecurity.
Where have you had to try and convince a board about something critical?
That's a good question, because I was going to say everywhere. I think it's more around my approach, which is,
what is the logical end game for AI?
there are enough indicators out there for us not to create a whopper or, create one of these machines that is going to try and take over the world.
Hello, this is the Cybersecurity Sessions podcast with me, Andy Ash, the CISO of Netacea. Today, we're going to be covering a number of topics around leadership in security and a person's journey from pre-security to CISO LV. So I'm very excited to welcome Simon Brownhill, a director at DWP Partners. Simon, do you want to give us a quick intro, please?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah. Simon Brownhill. I started my illustrious career in the military for about 9 years as a weapons engineer. Came out and started into cybersecurity a very long time ago, in 96. And sort of ended up on a myriad of a trail and ended up at LV for a contract. So one of my first contracting gigs. Yes, that will be part of the story, is how I went from a lowly consultant to the CISO and what that entailed for me. Since then, I've worked on NHS contracts. I've worked for Tesco, Sainsbury's, people like that doing PCI compliance. So I have a few war stories and a few scars, but I won't show you those.
Oh, no, feel free. Thanks, Simon. So we always ask this question at the beginning. Obviously, let's see, we're kind of AI based, and we want to know people's opinions on AI, and this generally helps. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the logical end game for AI in human society? 1 being that we succumb to our robot overlords and enter an age of servitude, and 10 being that humanity is free from the shackles of Earth and goes off to explore the universe in peace. Where do you stand on that, Simon?
We've rehearsed this. I'm a 7 out of 10, and I use the same sort of analogies. So my view was 1 would be Skynet and all that entailed from that, the T-1800s, and rather than us using good logic and testing, we ended up with poor results and at war with the computers. On a scale of 5, I sort of had, 2001 Space Odyssey, where logic has deemed us as not fit for purpose. And, we have that sort of manic, evil mantra of, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. But where I sit is sort of 7, which is that sort of Wall-E, her sort of compassionate collaboration, without getting too happy clappy, solving problems like climate change and, the world's problems. But again, I think with that, there will be privacy and some sort of breaches, which is good for us in cyber. But, we can at least don't have to hang up our cyber hats. And I think lastly, going to a 10 would be, and this is where I might be hung by geeks, but, it's the Star Trek or Star Wars sort of analogies of tripping off to warp speed across the universe, making everything smaller and giving us a really good sort of enablement with the technology, and, even having a little R2-D2 sort of robot there as your philosopher and guide. So I think my takeaway from that is, let's avoid number 1 and aim for number 7, and well, if we hit it, that would be good, but if we could get to 10, that would be brilliant. But as long as we don't, in the meantime, set up our coffee machines to make coffee and end up with a T800 trying to deliver it. I think that would be good for us.
Yeah, I mean, as an ex-military person, obviously the application of AI in the military worries me, and the way that in the start of 2025, we've had Mark Zuckerberg coming out basically saying that all mid-level developer jobs will be able to be done by AI systems this year. I think he said this year or within a year. I haven't seen the full interview, but then none of Mark Zuckerberg's clips are designed to be watched. They're designed to be seen in extremely small clips. So he's saying that for a reason. There's something, the next gen is already on the way. And in military terms, that worries me slightly. But I'm still on the positive. I can still see the application of this being positive for humanity. So
yeah, and I think we are, hopefully, there are enough indicators out there for us not to create a whopper or create one of these machines that is going to try and take over the world. So as long as we keep the safeguards in place, and I think whilst I was in the military, it was more valve technology and bubble jet memory. I think people are sensible and they understand the need for 4 eyes or 2 keys or whatever it is, so that people there are safeguards in place.
Yeah. So, Simon, obviously, you started in the military. Which service were you in?
In the Navy, 9 years.
Cool. And was that sea based or were you on a?
It was a bit of both. If any of my friends would be on the call, they would tell you I spent more time playing rugby or sport than I did actually doing any engineering. However, I saw my fair share of the world. So, Arctic, Antarctic, went over to West Indies, met quite a lot, and up to Norway and down to the Falklands. So not during the war. I'm not that old.
But yeah, amazing. Do you just want to take us through? So you completed your time in the forces, and then you moved out, and eventually became the CISO at LV, which is obviously a significant role and a significant journey. You just want to talk us through that a little bit, so we can get a picture of how we got there.
Well, I spent quite a lot of time, and I would say probably 15 years since leaving the military to ending up working for myself as a contractor. So I had a myriad of jobs. Like I said at the beginning, I was working for a number of companies, and I think that's where I learned my trade, was dipping into different things. So I did some pen testing, I did some consultancy. I had a good mentor when I was first into cyber, a guy called Peter, who was an older guy who came from DWL or Arthur Anderson or something like that, my memory. But he was a good guy, and he taught me, carry a notebook, make sure that you write down stuff, ask questions, and, the proverbial things around 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that ratio. And they were all good things for me to understand. And as I, put more strings to my bow, I had better idea of what I wanted to do, because like everyone, you sort of flounder around. And before internet was Google and, AI based, finding these things was difficult. So I kind of looked for the things that I was good at. And I think consultancy is one of those things where I've enjoyed. And LV, I was headhunted to go and help them to set up one of their third-party consultancy divisions, because they had a third-party process for reviewing who was coming in, what were they doing, what was their security posture, and then had a look, and it was very manual. So it was more around questionnaires and people answering those questionnaires, and then for the consultant to ring up and talk to them and interview them. And there were a couple of site visits and those sort of things, but it was very laborious. And also the questions were very generic, more around what did LV want to hear from me as the supplier or the third party? So there wasn't necessarily any sort of litmus test to see if what they were saying was true. And I think that's how I developed that part of the team, was to ask more probing questions, to ask for demonstrable evidence rather than send me your policies. So, and talking to people who were delivering the service, which allowed us to streamline that process and to become more efficient, and also to roll it out to the project teams as well within LV. So it became an internal looking thing as well. So what are we designing? And before, obviously, and security by design were buzzwords, it was one of the first steps we made into making sure that what we were doing, almost that concept of eating your own dog food and saying, are we doing the right thing before we go out and tell everybody else? So that was the first month. So I was there for initially 3 months, and it got extended out to 6 to 9 months. And then a guy joined who said, I want to set up as the CTO, I want to set up a design team, and I don't have any experience. Now, as I've said, I've experience with most things, and architecture was one of the things I sort of got my teeth into. So I helped him, and he was like, right, you can be the chief architect, and I need somebody who's going to do all the security and those sort of things as well. So again, we spoke to the CIO, and from there, it was just like, we haven't got anybody who can do this stuff. Could you run the teams, run the designs? And from there, it was just a question of getting up and down and pulling both of those teams together, really. And that was the sort of shortest version of what happened. And I was there for nearly 4 years. And yeah, it was a very enjoyable time. I enjoyed it immensely. And, I know that the CISO now, a guy called Dan, is, he came across from their networking team to be, to learn about it. And I know he's gone on to do bigger and better things. And, he's having this, very successful time because he's gone back and become the CISO there. So, yeah.
It's really interesting that person's come from networking. So obviously, man versus food, and the intro to that is the guy says, "I've done every job in the restaurant industry."
That's right, yeah.
And I sometimes feel I've worked in infrastructure, architecture, service, security, and I do feel like that could be a tagline I have. And it sounds like you have that background as well. That you've got lots of different experiences.
So my military career, I was made part of the defense cutbacks redundancy. So I took the redundancy, and I ended up investing that money into Novell C&E courses. So I became a C&E.
Wow.
And because I thought that's the wise money. So being an engineer, being logical, I looked at C&E and, do you know what? This is far superior to the Microsoft offering. And, if you look at them now, Novell, where's that?
Yeah.
I have my own sort of view on that every time you turned your computer on, what was the first thing it said? Microsoft. And then it said, your system's protected by Novell and your network and that sort of stuff. So I think people just saw Microsoft first. And then, well, if you see it first, therefore it is first. Therefore, why would I buy this other system that isn't very, it doesn't really say anything. They do one of these. So I think that was the problem with Novell. It was far superior, far more secure, and I'm sure people will comment.
I work with Novell Zen, so probably later iterations. Application deployment.
I'm very old. It was 3.11 and 3.12, and then I certified in 4.1.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. So, what do you think that amalgamation of experience across different disciplines of IT brings to a security role?
What experience? I think whatever it is. So, if I roll right back, I was before I joined the Navy, I started off as a flower salesman in Covent Garden Market, wholesale flowers. So, but of a few jokes, my daughter's suitors thought that I was Robert De Niro. Yes, of course, you know all about flowers. You worked in the military and you do weird stuff that we don't understand. Have you got a lie detector in the basement? I think from all of this stuff, though, if you look at experience, whatever it is, life experience, whether it's, if you get your fingers burnt, and I say this about my teams as well, so let them make mistakes, let them grow. There was a lovely analogy I heard many years ago, and I don't know who I can attribute it to, but about teaching people to grow. And it's like you've got a toddler and they want to pour a cup of juice. You let them do it, and they'll grab the juice bottle, they'll tip it over and pour it in, and some of it will go on the table, some of it will go in the cup, but they'll end up with a full cup of juice, and they'll wander off happy that they've got this full cup of juice, and you're stood there with the rag behind your back, and as soon as they've finished, you mop up, wipe up, and clean it up. And over time, there's less mopping up to do, there's less of your input that's needed, but they have the experiences, and I think that's key to anybody is you need to get your fingers burnt and have a few scars so that you can bring those to bear on new things and also watch out for those risks.
There is definitely some muscle memory involved in risk management, things you've seen before. My instinct is that most problems in IT are kind of from the same place. Most incidents come from the same type of behaviors or the same type of technology deployments or whatever it might be. That there's inherent risk in the way that some companies operate, right? And if you've seen it before, it makes it much easier to identify and mitigate.
I'm really glad you said that, because I'm a firm believer that same badge. Different badge. Same day. All companies are the same. Most of the risks are the same. There are new developments and new, you have ATPs, you have all of that sort of stuff. Then you have a WannaCry, which is, that is it. These things are very similar. They're doing the same sort of thing. They're the same things. You just have to be mindful about what it is and identifying that pattern. So it's not heuristic, but it is what is this thing doing to my network? Why is this thing happening? Identifying it, and then having the recall to say, have I seen this before? Because that's pretty much what life's about. You go to Spain, you use the same risk methodologies across the road as you do here, you're going to have a problem. But once you realize that cars are coming from a different direction, it's the same pattern.
Yeah, exactly. So you've talked about living the kind of security experience and get burnt, and having experience. And what advice, other than kind of practice security, I think that's basically what you were saying, would you have to anyone aspiring to kind of progress their career to a senior position? On top of that, do the job, be that person.
First started out, and I'm, as you can see by the right-hand side of me, I'm a proponent of reading and learning and studying. And I think there's nothing better than to learn. And I think the reason why I took to consultancy so late was because I enjoyed the technical camaraderie, because I think that is one of the things that you can't get enough of. So,
yeah, agree.
Whether someone wants to mentor you or not isn't really their choice if you're inquisitive. So you will be mentored by people around you, even if they don't think they're mentoring you. So, I had a gang of people when I first started at a company called Peapod, and we all took the top of our computers off and looked at the inside, so we understood how it worked. And ensured that we understood what component talked to what component and went over to each other's desks when we had a spare 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'd have a coffee and talk about how does this file system work? So, looking at Sun OS and things like that. So, really back in the day, a technical conversation talking about things that were completely out of my depth. So, could you go and fault find a problem up in Newcastle and then end up on the phone with my colleagues back in London, say, right, okay, I've looked at this, I've got a sniffer on the network, and, getting it down to the fact that the company were using their own proprietary version of IP at the time. So an IP version, it was called Chameleon, and somebody had set the MTU values at, and I'm really geeking out here now, but there was a problem. So they couldn't be compiled back properly, and so they were losing packets on the network. And, like I say, it's interesting, and I'd never have got to that point if it wasn't for the people around me. Again, it's a learning curve, and now I know, about CRCs and all of those sort of things. And sorry if I'm losing people, but that was at the time I didn't have a clue, and that was the only way you were going to learn. And that's another thing that I'm a really, really big proponent of, is get yourself into the level of water where your feet aren't quite touching the ground and struggle, because struggle makes you grow, and that's what you want to do if you want to.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. How do you think, so there's, not wanting to highlight that was probably, if you mentioned in Sun OS, was probably quite a while ago. Things have changed significantly, not just in security culture, but in working culture. So, the rise of, we're both at home. We haven't come into a studio to record this. The kind of online resources that you might want to learn from today. How was kind of the cultural shift in working practice affected that way that you're talking about learning? Is that something that you've adapted to as a consultant, or?
Yeah, I do quite a lot of work from home. Again, when COVID hit, I was the head of security, or I kind of say CISO at London Ambulance. So I was doing a contract there. And we saw it coming as the cyber team, and actually used our own resilience and drew ourselves away. However, funnily enough, being a cybersecurity consultant, I've been working from home for a long time, even dial-up working from home. So working from home wasn't new to me. I think the problem now for most people is that FaceTime, that actual being with other people and hearing that sigh of, oh no, what's that? And you can turn around and be with that person to say, are you okay? What's going on? And you can develop that team spirit. It's only with things like Teams where you can say, I've got a problem, or Slack, whatever you're using. If you can talk to each other, there is that, but there is that no real time sort of connection and togetherness. I think it is about a team. And whilst, for some of us who don't really want to be around people, all the time, and I know there's a few geeky people in my life who really wouldn't want to see another person if they, ever again. But it's important for people to be around people so that you can dump those ideas off of people, so you aren't, as I call it, technically lonely. You are a team, and you're growing as a set of individuals because you all pull each other along. And like we said earlier on, it's about life experience.
Yeah. And it's the technical camaraderie is massively important, and it's something that we managed to foster in Netsphere through the pandemic, and now we are remote first, so it can be done, and it takes more effort. Like you say, the kind of head hitting the keyboard, that sound that you hear if something's going wrong, and everyone's, and if you have that camaraderie, everybody immediately wants to know what it is, because that guy's that person, so he's just discovered it, and it's like, oh, I want to know what this is, and everybody gathers round, and suddenly everyone's talking about the problem, and it
Yeah.
starts to get fixed. More difficult when people are remote, but it is possible.
Absolutely.
Alongside the learning piece and mentoring.
Mm.
We need to move on though. So in kind of your roles, your more senior roles, the CISO relationship with the board is something that comes up quite a lot in terms of conversation and other podcasts and webinars. Do you think boards see security in the role of the CISO as kind of intrinsically valuable, or a cost center, or only there to deliver bad news? Right?
Yeah, I think with that, it's complex, and I think it's down to the CISO to control that relationship. So if you start off with you guys are the bad news bears, and you're bringing bad news to my door every single time I see you, and everything's a problem, or you're an overhead, you're a cost, you're not bringing in any value to my organization. That firmly sits with the CISO. The CISO is there to change that concept. And it's a double-edged sword, I would say, as in the CISO needs to challenge the board back as to say, what are your risks? What keeps you up at night? What stops you from sleeping? If the lights went out today, what would you do? How would you cope? Again, I'm a proponent of Cyber 101. Let's go back to risk assessments. If it's driven by risk and people understand what the risk is and then what your appetite is, because that's a totally different thing, you can move forward. And without the fostering concepts of privacy by design, security by design, companies won't or can't have a view on it unless the CISO helps them to establish that view. So what can we do to mitigate these risks? And appetite is the big thing. I've worked for a number of organizations, and one of my first contracting jobs or working for myself, one of my first customers, but either had a lot of spare cash. They had money in the bank. They were, selling plans and those sort of things, and being able to, they had a good reserve of cash. So when I came up with the risks, they said, how much is that risk? And they're about £250,000. That's fine. We've got that in the bank. I think you're kind of going to have to show that to an auditor when they come in and say, yeah, that's fine. But will work to the worst case scenario in their own head. So unless you talk to the board and say, what are you accepting? What can we just take on board? And what do we have to find controls for that aren't accepting that risk? That's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to communicate that issue or the reason to spend money on those to the board than it is to just come up with madcapped ideas that you think, we'll just do that.
And having that kind of risk assessment, quantification of cost associated to the risk or potential loss associated to the risk genuinely helps. It is difficult because a lot of security risks, so ransomware puts the entire value of the company at risk, and that's always going to be, it's always going to be a big number to the people you're reading it to. So that always will come up to the top. But in terms of your interactions with boards, obviously quite often CISOs, and I know I have done this, the perception is that you come in with a shopping list. And nobody really wants to sponsor a shopping list. So where have you had to try and convince a board about something critical related to a risk? And how did you go about it to make sure that the right outcome was achieved?
Good question, because I'm going to say everywhere. And I think it's more around my approach, which is before you go with a shopping list, okay, you'll have your shopping list. It doesn't matter, day 2 or 3, you'll have a shopping list. But the thing is, furnishing the board with good metrics and showing them where the holes are. So risk assessment, metrics, success stories, those sort of things will help the board, but also educating them as well. So you can't expect to go into somebody and say, you're going to have to spend thousands of pounds on an issue when you don't know how much that problem's going to cost them. So if they're informed and educated and they know a £10 problem takes £1 to fix, is a lot different to saying you got a £10 problem, it's going to cost you 50 quid to fix that.
Yep.
Well, nobody's going to do that but if they're educated, they'll definitely know that, because you're telling them right. And if you use metrics, you can demonstrate these things, and metrics are good, and they're good for board reports, and to give the board the information that they can go back to. And as long as it's, again, I caveat this heavily, it can't have too much human interaction with those numbers, because as soon as they do, there's bias, and if there's bias, there's doubt, and if there's doubt, you're not going to get your pennies. So that would be my guidance, is that whatever you produce, make sure that it is solid, because if it's solid, it can't be argued, because as soon as there's an argument and you can't go back to actuals, so somebody might be doing you a favor and just upping those figures so that you're having more probes against your network, the statistics are higher, you've shot yourself in the foot. So it's got to be open and honest and without bias.
So kind of the last topic for the podcast today, Simon, this is kind of your leadership style and leadership versus management. I'll kind of roll a couple of questions into one. And I think that, how involved with your team do you like to get? And what is your approach to nurturing skills within those teams?
Yeah, I go back to my orange juice analogy. But anyone who's ever worked for me in a sort of, under my leadership will know that I stop people from that computer says no sort of mentality. Cyber, no, you can't do that. I want people to come over to us and talk to us, and I'm talking about that office environment again, but I want people to come to you and say, I want to do this. And rather than saying no, say, yeah, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve? Because if I understand what you're trying to achieve, you're not bringing me a solution to your problem. You're bringing me the problem. If I understand the problem, I can see if it fits with what we've already got on our in our portfolio. I can see if it's something that we can just sideline into another program of work. I can build it into the budgets. And when I say I'm talking we can, as the security and cyber team, develop a solution for you. Because if you understand the problem, you can come up with a simple solution. And I'm a big proponent of KISS, because I think, keeping it stupid, or keeping it simple stupid even, keeping it simple is the key here, so that everybody understands what you're doing. So I kind of push into my teams. Don't go in with a negative mindset. Just look at the art of the possible. If you can't do it, then say, I can't do it, and escalate it. And that's the point of being in a team. Is doesn't matter who you are, even if you're the CISO, you'll have your own network of people that you can ask without dropping yourself in it. And I think that's the key here, is to grow your network, grow your experience, and grow your learning, but also to mentor and teach your customers, whether they're internal clients or external clients. Everyone needs to grow, and everyone needs to understand what you're doing, because if you do the same stuff every single time, or if you teach somebody else to do it, then they do it and they come and ask you a really good question. And I say this to most of my customers and most of my prospects. My job here is to teach you how to do this stuff yourself. So that the next time we engage, I may have to get one of these books off the shelf and to research something, because I want to be stretched as well. I don't want to be doing that boring stuff, because everyone wants to do something new and learn something new and to grow themselves. So that's pretty much my ethos with people is, why would I, you want to grow? Let me let you grow. Let me let me help you to help yourself. Go make mistakes, because as long as we don't kill anybody, or we don't, lose lives, or, millions of pounds don't go down the drain, it's not really a big problem. And go design something, bring it back to me. If it's good, we'll let it fly. If it's rubbish, we'll start again.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much my view.
Giving people their heads is sounds like the synopsis of that, and something that I agree with wholeheartedly.
I think you can't be dictatorial or dogmatic with this stuff, because again, that person may have the idea that actually becomes something brilliant for your organization, actually changes everything that you do. And they may be a junior person, but if you didn't let them try, you'd never have known that. And you carry on doing the same stuff every single day.
Cool. Simon, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been brilliant. If you have any questions for us, or there's a topic you want us to cover in a future episode, either leave a comment if you're listening via Spotify or YouTube, or you can email podcast@netsuit.com. Please make sure you do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time for more cybersecurity sessions.